Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing discussion of the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Daniel Gill, Lavana Tenen, and Adele Packer. So today we're going to pick up where we left off last time in our last episode, if you watched it, uh, and we discussed the Glassblower poster, but it led us to the E-Torus article in which that subject appeared. Um, we kind of put the cart before the horse in doing that. There was a reason that article appeared, or that subject appeared in that particular article. But we're going to go through that specific E-Torus newsletter today. And it's kind of a transition of going from the posters to the E-Torus newsletters, which we will now continue in future episodes. To see the newsletter that we're discussing, you can go to this link that I'm putting on the screen, or go to the description on the YouTube page where I actually have a link, and that'll lead you directly to this article on meru.org, the Meru Foundation website. So it makes it easy now. You just click on the link and you'll be able to follow along, and we'll go through the newsletter in a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to put a little historical context on E-Torus, or Torus in general. It started out as a print newsletter, and Lavana will give us some little bit historical context. This is volume 2, number 3, July 1993. I guess this is a collector's item at this point. I don't think there's a lot of these around. I know I have a few others in old boxes somewhere. But how did this, or when did this start, Lavana?
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. It probably, if that's volume two in 93, then
Mhm.
we probably started doing it in like 1992, I would guess. 91, 92. Um, and basically what it was, I had this mailing list. I had a bulk mail account at the post office, and I would print them out on Xerox. We had a good Xerox machine at the time, so I would print them out on that. This was this was before the kind of printer, before desktop publishing printers. And It was a forum for our work at the time. We also solicited articles from some of the people that we were working with at the time. Um, it's a historical document at this point, in that of all of them, there's like only two of the articles that Stanley published that we still have available publicly on our website. Um, One of them is called The God of Abraham, a Mathematician's Point of View, and that's actually the issue that Bill has there. Um,
1993, July.
yeah, July. Um, it was a project of outreach. It was a way of finding out who was interested in what we were doing. Um, it was interesting at the time to solicit articles from the people who were on our board of advisors or who were working with us. Um, but at a certain point, I guess we did 4 volumes of them, and the last one would have been, probably 1994 to 5. And It just became too much physical work for the benefit to us. And also by that time, desktop publishing was starting to be it was starting to take over the field. Basically, people were expecting to be able to access stuff on the web, and there was a break. We moved from California, where we were at the time when we were publishing the Taurus, to Massachusetts, where we lived for 15 years, approximately 17 years, actually. And once we set up our website when we first moved to Massachusetts, we set up Meru.org. And at that point, we decided to start what we called the E-Torus newsletter. E as in electronic Taurus. Everybody knows what that is now, but at the time they kind of didn't. Originally, it was simply something that I sent out periodically on an email list. And eventually we got too many subscribers, so it was 4 email lists. And then eventually we became able to issue these newsletters in PDF form. And when obviously in PDF form, we could include the illustrations. And at that point, the essays that we were publishing, Stanley's essays mostly, the essays that we were publishing started to include the illustrations that he had also already always been making, but which I couldn't send out via email in any reliable way. There's a site on Meru.org called Newsletter Archive. And if you go to Meru.org, there's a link to the newsletter archive on the right-hand side of the page. You'll see it if you get to the whole page. Those are the materials we're going to be discussing. The E-Torus was published, as I say, kind of aperiodically, every now and then, when we had something to say and when we had the time to say it. And I think the last one we published was in 2017, I think. I'm not recalling exactly. And at that point, things were changing in Meru Foundation, and we weren't in a position to be able to actually publish new material at that point. So that's kind of the history of the whole thing. There's interesting stuff. I've been sort of looking at it myself for the first time in many, many years. Interesting stuff, even in some of the older, text-based, text format stuff, which is on the archive. It's worth a look.
Yeah.
So here we are.
These are collector's items, and there was an attempt to do illustrations and stuff in these, but obviously it got a lot easier when it became digital. So we're going to be pouring through some of these, and if you go through them yourself, you'll see some of them are maybe a couple of pages, an article or two, and some are even are more involved. You'll see a little kind of a historical progression where the book is coming, and then here's article from book. It's kind of interesting to see.
An important note is that particularly after 2011, which is when our book was actually published, most of the essays that we published in the E-Torus depended on information, assumed some familiarity with information that actually had been published in the book. So if you're a little bit confused about terminology or whatever, in some of the later ones, the 50s and 60s issues, go back and read some of the early ones, because it kind of depends on terminology that isn't always included.
Okay, so let's put this one up, the one that we referred to last episode. And again, this is from our website, or from the Meru.org website. I'm just grabbing it from there. And this one is just chock full of information. I mean, there's a lot on this particular on this particular E-Torus. Again, it's number 62, May 2014. And as a lot of them did, this particular one is the first couple of pages are somewhat irrelevant to what we're talking about today. This one talks about current and long-term projects. There was a Stan's burning desire to get into the Sefer Yetzirah and provide a translation that even today is not available. Sefer Yetzirah is one of the oldest, or probably the oldest Kabbalistic book, and some references it back to Abraham or Rabbi Akiva, but it's almost impossible to put it into a literary form, which several have tried to do. Stan, having his geometric perspective, was able to come up with translations that made sense, but we're not going to talk about that today. The second page is Meru's future outlook. Again, fundraising, especially for a nonprofit, is an ongoing thing. And so there's discussion. And by the way, we are still taking donations, so that hasn't, don't let that stop you. You know, we're still glad to do that. The third page, he talks about, or they talked about the Shatia, which we did a couple of episodes back, the foundation stone, and we went through a lot of this previously. I think 2 or 3 episodes back, we covered this topic. And this was kind of all flowing into a specific topic or reason for having these particular ones. But today we're going to go into this page. What's in a name? It's called Inyan. And I think early in our programs, we did cover this, but I think it's definitely worth going through again. It's a really important topic, and has a lot of relevance in much of what we've been talking about. This page kind of gives you a background on what Inyan is. It refers to the 12th century poet Yehudi Halevi and his writing Al-Kuzari. It was a writing that he had, or is based on a letter was addressed to the king of the Khazars, who chose to convert his kingdom to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century. But this was aimed at Halevi's contemporaries in the 12th century. If we go down to the bottom of the page, Inyan is generally translated as device and is now thought to refer to any sort of device. However, as noted in the above passage, which we're not going to read through now, it is likely that Halevi had something more in mind. And we're going to go to the next page where there's a graphical analysis of Inyan, actually from Alphabet That Changed the World, from the book. Oh, Lavana, you have a comment?
Yeah, just a little point. That basically the point of this, taking off this from this quote from Al-Khuzari, this was a section of that letter which was of Halevi's writing, which was specifically talking about the creation and the alphabet, and the line that started all of this is, now this is Halevi: the shapes of the letters are not the result of accident, but of a device, and for that he uses the word Inyan, which is in harmony with the character of each letter. A device which is in harmony with the character of each letter. And then the discussion that we're going to do goes into specifically the Hebrew spelling of that word Inyan and what each of those individual letters signify.
Right. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the next page, which actually shows the graphic. Now, Daniel, you had talked about this before, and you had an additional perspective, I believe, on this topic of Inyan.
Yeah, I mean the typical, Inyan is a really interesting word in Hebrew and in rabbinic literature. It can mean many things. It can mean thing. It can mean area of study. It can mean matter, and it can mean device. And I think Stan makes a really compelling argument here for that he meant an actual device. And I think the reason is let me just look here. Right. Halevi asserts that these names were appropriate to the beings to which they were attached, right? So it comes out of Halevi's work where he's discussing how Adam named the animals in the Garden of Eden, right? So to speak, or however you want to take that. But Halevi's assertion that the names were appropriate, right? Like an elephant. I remember Stan and I, all three of us, I think, going over that, right? The mouth learner, the mouth, with the mouth is the hand. So it's a very appeal, pay yud lamed. So the mouth hand learner, it's just a really good example. But the fact that Yehuda Halevi relates the naming of the animals to the concept behind the letters, to the Inyan behind the letters, is very significant. That he's mentioning, meaning similarly, and Stan mentions this here, similarly in that each letter has this Inyan, this device that kind of is the essence of the letter, or exposes the essence of the letter, or helps understand the essence of the letter, or in harmony with each letter. So too then the letters themselves are in harmony with nature, or with the kind of the natural world that we find ourselves in, or the supernatural world, whatever it is. Gan Eden is not a simple thing but the fact that it's related to the naming of the animals, that he's mentioning it there, I think is actually a really strong argument for the Inyan being an actual device, or the hand model. It's not entirely clear that he's not explicit. He doesn't say, and there's a hand model, but the fact that he mentions there's an Inyan that is in harmony with each letter, meaning it's somehow universal but also specific to each letter. And then that translates into naming things in the world that also are real, is a very strong support. I think the rabbinic support, it probably couldn't be stronger, really, for the finding of the hand model. Meaning, if you could go, you could interview Rabbi Yehuda Halevi right now and say, hey, check this out. He would say, oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. Even though he might not have been talking about it explicitly at the time. So I think it's an interesting, very interesting thing, and I don't think that's similarly to if I'm sitting and learning a Daf Gemara or something, I'm learning something, and I have an insight into the Gemara that no one else had, and it really works within the confines of that, whatever's going on in the discussion. It's fine. It's not. It's because it's coming from within, as opposed to something that's being put on from without. And I think this is probably the best argument, one of the best arguments, other than the Shefatal, the entire book, and all the other millions of sources. But this is the most explicit, I think, kind of, what do you call that? Haskama, they would say. This is kind of like very much in support of, or kind of the legitimacy of. I mean, not that I don't think it needs it, but just for outside sources, people who might be listening say, well, where does this come from? Is there any source in rabbinic literature? I think this actually is one of them, and it's very real.
I didn't mention before that this was based on the idea that the concept that Adam named the animals using a device in the Garden of Eden. That's based on that.
Actually, I think what it says is that he named the animals each according to its nature, or something like that. That's my recollection. Right. And You'll find it in the Bible, folks. Uh,
Adele, do you have any relationship with this idea, especially when you were doing your choreography, the idea of even an internal device, that you turn around in your mind?
Oh, good. I'm not muted. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just turned around in our mind. We had some models that were rough models that Stan gave to me, and I could show the group how it fit in the hand. I wanted to get it for today, but I couldn't place it where I had left my little Inyans. But this spiral, this torus, or slice of a torus, it's a reciprocal spiral. And we use that not only as though we were holding that and used our hands according to the shapes of the letters as Stan gestured them, but we also used floor patterns in spirals, and our bodies turning in spirals as though we were embodying this very spiral to discover movement and express it. And Lavana has it in her hand. So it fits around the thumb and then scoops into the palm of the hand. So you can see she's demonstrating, and I was able to hold them when I visited in California, and it would have been very interesting to actually hold them. At one point, we were going to paint the inside of our hand in a spiral and paint it kind of like a copper that would shine in the light. We had a lot of ideas, but in the end, we did other movements and we did lifts and we were using our hands. So it might have been something we could have incorporated literally, but at least we had that shape. And every letter is formed by a turn of the hand or wrist or opening of the arm, but always the hand shaping the spiral. And yeah, it created beautiful movement and very expressive of the featured letters as they were featured in that particular choreography. And I've since used this same concept with people's names or with specific passages in Torah. As we're studying it, we look at the text and we look at the word. And then when we shape the word, spelling it with our hands, new insights come up. So it's an embodied practice to use these as though we're holding the Inyan in our hands. And I'm continuing to explore it. I'm going to present to the Embodied Jewish Wisdom Network on the 20th. And we're looking at kinship, nearness, closeness with kirva, a Hebrew word. And I'm going to be pulling all the letters apart to create movement that I'm hoping people will embody in such a way that they have an experience of being near, whether it's to each other or to a divine spirit. I think that's all possible with this practice. So that's what I'm working on.
Yeah. I'd actually, I see that here on the page that you just pointed to, there is this graphic, which may be, I think some elements of it I'd like to explain a bit, because it involves both Hebrew letters and their meaning and a little bit of math. And I don't want people to be confused, basically because this drawing contains all the elements which Stanley felt were important and really confirming in this word device, Inyan. So, and Daniel, or Michael, you can, if I say something that's a little bit off about the Hebrew letters themselves, please jump in and fix me. So, but it's basically it's spelt in with 4 letters, Ayin, Nun, Yud, and the final version of Nun, the version of Nun that occurs when it ends a word, and which, in the way that we have been exploring the Hebrew alphabet, including each of the final letters as a separate letter with its own separate meaning, it has a meaning that is related to the same letter when it occurs in the middle of the word, but which takes it a step further. So, okay, so the first letter is Ayin. Ayin means, it can mean an eye, it can mean a well, something that sinks, that is circular and deep. So if you take a look on the lower left-hand side of the poster where it says circle spring Ayin, what Stanley is pointing to is what in mathematics, we would call the origin, that 0 point. But the idea being that this is something that is circling that point, and at infinity, quote unquote, it would get there. But it's one of those things at any rate. If you're talking, this is a form of what in math they call a reciprocal spiral, which is one of those things which heads towards a particular point but never gets there. Anyway, so we have Ayin, this circle circling that origin point. Okay, the next letter is Yud, which is hand, which is, if
So
you
next
look.
letter is Nun.
Oh, excuse me, sorry. Next letter is Nun. Nun is a connector. So we have Ayin, which is a circle, and Nun, there's a connector between a point. Okay, that Yud is a point. It's one little thing. And what he's thinking there is that this is the point of infinity where it starts. The kind of thing that you don't ever get to in this reality, but if you can think in the abstract, there's an infinite where it starts. So, okay, connecting a point with, and then go up to the upper right, final Nun, which we always say is to the nth degree, forever, always. Okay, so here we have a circle connecting its infinite point to something that goes on forever. That is a precise description of the reciprocal spiral. If you were going to use Hebrew letters to actually define this mathematical function, these are the letters you'd use, because that's what they mean. This totally blew him away. It still blows me away whenever I think about it, because it is so exact. So I will tell you, if the mathematical terminology, as in asymptote of reciprocal spiral, is a circle that strangles the origin at a = 0, y = 0. Okay, that's the infinite point at the beginning that you can never get to, but that everything starts from. And asymptote of reciprocal spiral is y = 1. That's continuing on, always approaching the infinite. In our reality, never quite getting there, because we live in reality that has boundaries. But nonetheless, that's what it's approaching. So the translation, his internal mental translation that he was working with this word, is down at the lower right of the poster. A circular spring with a connecting line connecting a point to something that goes to the nth degree. The point is at the thumb tip of the model, and here is the circling, and then okay, you have to look at it this way now, because this model is in 3 dimensions, and that diagram is in 2 dimensions. And that's an important thing to remember always when we're talking about our diagrams. Stanley flipped back and forth between 2D and 3D without a thought. But that's why this is suddenly turned over, because this is actually a 3-dimensional thing going forever. Okay, I hope that made a little bit of sense. And, you know, I encourage you to have a look at this drawing and just know that this really is an exact definition of the spiral, the vortex that defines the hand model.
Yeah, and once again, he not only takes the concept, but he breaks it down letter by letter to kind of prove his point, which, yeah, again, that must have been mind-blowing when it's amazing how it all just kind of clicks, you know, back to a 12th century idea. Michael, let me ask you about this idea. Is this, because it's not something that comes up in any of the literature that I've seen over the years in terms of even Kabbalistic ideas. But again, most writers aren't thinking multidimensional, you know, ideas. Is this something that you've ever encountered, this concept of a device, or, you know, thinking things in terms of in this fashion?
In Inyan, also the word Inyan also means idea or subject, or the word anyen from it means interesting. It's when we talk about a device, we're talking about something that's entered into the 3D world that is as the expression that Stan always used, which was a geometric model. It's a model for something. It's an Inyan. It's an idea that's embodied, just as the name of that elephant is embodied in its name. A name is a geometric model. We don't think of it that way, but that's what somebody's name is. Okay, I say Bill Haber, and that's a geometric model. If I write it out, it's now geometric. And you're geometric. Some days more, some days less. But we're all geometric models for something, and that's represented by a name, which is why the 4-letter name of God, the Tetragrammaton, is, and we refer to God as Hashem. The name, a name is a model and is an idea. That's where this has a certain familiarity to me, because in the Jewish meditation world, and even in the non-Jewish meditation world, what is a mantra? It's a sound. We see a pictogram of it. We see it written. We see Om written, or Tao written, and the picture represents an idea. It's easier for us if it's something we can relate to. If we get the whole world in our hands, to coin a great name for a song, but if we get the whole world in our hands, it's a geometric model. It's the idea. It's the Inyan, in and Inyan. That's not so easy to say quickly. And that's where this has a familiarity to me, because one does in Jewish meditation meditate on the various names of God, and each one has a different character to it, a different idea represented in that name that you've written out. And that's really it's hard for us to imagine a name as a geometric model. but that's what it is, whether it's God's name or a name of a thing. In us, it's as if we're saying in that word peel, referring to the elephant, that word is the DNA signature for an elephant. Something is there in those letters that when Adam looked at an elephant and said, peel, that's what that is. There was something in that name that reflected the full DNA coding for an elephant. Now, for us today, it's maybe easier to understand in that we have the concept of DNA, which of course was there before it was part of the programming. In other words, that programming, all the little switches on the DNA strands were already flipped to produce an elephant. Otherwise, we'd all have that nose or mouth or trunk, whatever it is. Okay, we'd all have that. But the switches were different, and so we don't have that. We have blue eyes or brown eyes. We have green eyes. We have, attached and detached earlobes, which I somehow remember from a 9th grade biology class. That really, I mean, the DNA had to be bothered with that, down to that extent, as to whether my earlobe was attached to the side of my cheek or not. That's mind-boggling. And there are billions of these switches that are on and off. Yeah. So if we think of a model, the DNA is a model. If we could project it holographically, which they now can do, and say, that's an elephant. Oh, look at that one. That's got these switches on. That must be a dandelion. Because the same DNA in us is the same DNA in animals and plants.
Yeah. Something that just occurred to me, just tying this back with some things that I'm sure we must have spoken about very early on when we were dealing with the letters and the letter meanings. Let's go back to elephant for a moment, peel. The creature that learns with its mouth, okay? It's talking about what the elephant does, not what it looks like, not how big it is, but what it does. Again, these terms, these names, these letters describe actions. It's not things that what we're doing. The letters, a deeper understanding of the letters happens when you think about them as verbs. Think about their meanings as verbs as opposed to nouns. And then I just collected. Oh, okay. What, again, back to this thing in the Bible, we're talking metaphor here for most of us, that when the animals were named by Adam, what was he doing? He was looking at what they did. What are they? What did they do? And I think that's just something to keep in the back of our minds as we do these explorations, this is a world of action. And to your comments about geometry, Michael, yes, absolutely. I've said, in the past that in a sense, we live within geometry. We live within a world that is physical in, 3 or 4 dimensions, depending on how you count the passage of time. And so that is why geometry and geometric metaphor can be used as something universal. It's something that, a cube is the same everywhere on Earth. It is, at least in theory, the same anywhere you might encounter it. So that's, that's a way of personally relating to, we live within geometry, and therefore geometry is relevant and a useful metaphor and a useful lens through which to view things.
And it's also one of the reasons that we can look at the hand gesture language as being universal, because it's based on what you just described. You know, we're not talking about any particular philosophy or culture or religion or, you know, geographical area. This is all based on base human and physical reality. Yes, go ahead, Adele.
I hope I can pull this together. So here's this word, Inyan, that means device, but also means idea. And within these letters that this device helps us shape and articulate are many ideas and movement and action, and we think of them as verbs. So I'm looking at this geometric shape, and it's a path. It's a path, and it has dynamic, and it has movement in it. Right. So I'm looking at like this, whether you look at the device in the left or you look at the actual geometric form on 2 dimensions on paper, you can see that. And I'm remembering a teaching that shame, which is name, is also, you just change a vowel, the same root letters is sham. So your sham is your shame is your sham. It's your path. It's where you're going. It's what you do. It's who you are in this world. So here we have this name called we're calling it an Inyan, but there's an idea behind it and there's movement behind it. And to just think of the expanse of concept that is in this small drawing. It's the same spiral that you see in the Webb telescope photographs. The movement in the universe, the planets making streaks in the sky that resemble this. And then you come all the way down to your own hand. And what expression comes from our hands? All of our action. Stan said it's an extension. Our hands are an extension of our thoughts. We bring it into action through our hands. So all of these relationships are kind of blowing my mind right now. I hope they're blowing your mind too. That his ideas and his thinking was so expansive and encompassing so many ideas. So I like to think of that, you know, like I think of my name. And then I remember one day when Michael said, yeah, and there are words inside Dahlia that help you look at your name differently. And it did. So instead of letter by letter, I saw words within a word. And that's really the beauty of Hebrew, that each letter can enlighten the word as a whole, related words enlighten the word. And yeah, it's all in this little Inyan, because it's not just a device, it's ideas, it's matter, you know, it's subject matter. It's like, let's form a group that's going to have a little Inyan about blank, right? And you have a study group. And that word comes up quite a bit, not specifically about a device, but about an idea. So.
Yeah, let's go back. So why is this Inyan a part of this article? And if we scroll down to the next page, this is what we kind of went through last episode. Again, it's the idea of going through the dimensions. And here Stan is going through the golden rules through the dimensions, the Sephirotic tree. We kind of covered this last time, but this is all connected. And then we go through the various dimensions, what comes around. Then we talked about Ruach, the breath, and then came to the Glassblower. And this is a little bit different poster than we showed last time on this page. How does this all connect? What is the connection here? What is the flow? What is going on in Stan's mind? What is he thinking here? It's not easy to dissect, but it is a discussion of multidimensionality without question.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is that it's just, just to even say he was thinking about the spirituality as multidimensional. And one of the biggest problems with spirituality can be that it's like unit dimensional. There's just nothing outside of it, as opposed to being so much one thing that it encompasses everything in all dimensions. And I think that it's a testament to Stan's kind of expanded consciousness, that he saw Judaism and he saw spirituality as just having to be multidimensional. It wasn't a question that, it was, it's this and it's this only. It's like, it's multidimensional. It's movement. It's moving from dimension to dimension. It's not static, which of course, our entire tradition is based on the lunar calendar, which, the moon, unlike the sun, is constantly changing its dimensions that we see in the sky. So Judaism at its essence is based on a recognition of multidimensionality, of things changing. You're not always in love with it. Sometimes it's frustrating, sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's expansive and wonderful and joyous and incredible. And it's moving through different dimensions. And I think that Stan is showing this in like the inner aspect of it, like the kind of like at its functional level, that's actually how spirituality functions.
It makes me think about Stan and the challenges that he had in terms of presenting his work, and the fact that to him this was so clear. It was so clear cut, and his ability to disseminate this information. Obviously, he's doing it on paper here. He did it orally through his presentations. It almost needed a little sidebar in terms of his presentations. Always keep this in mind. It's not something that he talked about a lot, and I kind of wish he had. It might have helped me, in terms of my understanding, but always have that sidebar. This is what we're talking about here. We're looking at it through this lens of multidimensionality. And now here we are, we're finally getting to extract it out. And, now it's starting to become clearer for us. Lavana, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple of them. You're right that he was always more able to at least get people interested in these ideas when he was more physically able to present them. And by the time this E-Torus came out, 2014, his physical health and strength were already declining, such that, as I'm sure you're aware of, Bill, it was hard to get him even coherently on video shot on our dining table because he had health issues. And so, I also regret that he was not able to actually make a video presentation of these ideas, because they're actually quite important. I think to get a glimpse of what he would have had in mind with this particular paper and why these particular words, how he was tying them together, I need to go back to the idea of ruach, spirit, which is a word that's translated both as spirit and as breath. They're considered as the same kind of idea if you're thinking in Hebrew in this context. So when you hear the word ruach, you kind of have to have both things in mind. That and, okay, there is why a glassblower. There are various places in commentary where the analogy of God as the glassblower, as far as he is creating the world with his spirit. And I can read you a little quote here, which is, the quote is from R.E.A. Kaplan's commentary on Sefer Yetzirah, and you'll find it on the last page of this article, that in general, the word ruach, spirit, breath, also indicates both motion and communication. The spirit of life, ruach of life in an animal, is the power that causes it to move. This is also describing the act of creation. The analogy, and here we get to the point, would be to the formation of a glass vessel. First, the breath, ruach, emanates from the mouth of the glassblower, and the analogy being this is God and creation of our reality. The vessel is shaped through the interaction of the breath, where the wind bounding off the walls causes pressure. The vessel then expands in all spatial directions. Okay, and here's how Stanley was relating these things. Identifying ruach as the first breath enables us to understand the glassblower analogy. Earlier, we illustrated how the generation of the golden rule through the dimensions matches the structure of the Sephirotic tree. Here's what Bill was saying earlier. The expanding of circles of that model don't just get larger and larger, they grow dimensionally from a point to a line segment to a circle to a sphere to a hypersphere. And that is an important thing to keep in mind. He reused that drawing of the expanding through the dimensions in many of his later posters. He used it a lot. It was a very important idea. And the final paragraph of this shows what he was really thinking. What's in a name? It depends on its context and the tools one uses to examine it. Recovery of the functional meaning of each Hebrew letter enables us to more clearly read the intended meaning of words, reversing the process by which Adam named the creatures. In Gan Eden, the two trees in the garden, and that's a poster we discussed earlier, Evan Shatia, which means foundation stone, the inverted T as above, so below triangle, and that's shown on the first page of this essay. Evan Shatia is shown as both the tree of life and the tree of knowledge in Eden, the same form in different contexts. Similarly, ruach, first breath, and our first hand model take the same geometry. The geometry of ruach, the breath of life at the top of the Sephirotic tree, becomes the hand that makes our choices as we proceed down the tree. The inverted T geometry, by which he means the inverted T and its expansion into the hand model and beyond. The inverted T geometry is truly the foundation stone and is key to unlocking the deep meaning of Kabbalistic imagery. That's what he was going for. And that's who he was hoping would read and understand the paper. And in fact, a few people have, present company included. But it was, he always felt that this was one of his most important papers in terms of connecting ideas at least for people who understood the terminology he was using. And I confess that at the time when I was typing it and formatting it and putting it together, and he gave it to me in pieces and chunks, I wasn't paying attention to the actual flow of the ideas myself. When I reread this paper all the way through from the beginning a couple of weeks ago, with the understanding that I have now and the fact that I'm not dealing with trying to get it to print out properly, I realized that, yes, there's some very deep connections that he's trying to express in what
Michael, can you mute? That noise coming from you? Okay, thank you.
I realize that there are some very deep connections that he is expressing in what for him was economical expository language, assuming that people understood his past work or understood the terminology that he was using. He was actually attempting to make the connection explicit to lead to the point as to why this kind of geometric analysis based on a deep understanding of the letters themselves is a key to understanding Kabbalistic literature, which has defied translation, certainly, and which has seemed to many people either only poetic or nonsensical or doesn't make any sense. To him, as he explored it, it did. And now I see that this actually leads very directly into the way that he was exploring Sefer Yetzirah, which we have his notes, his diagrammed notes, but we have no text explaining them except these little snippets in one paper or another.
Right.
When I remember, so I was, this was maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and there was a rabbi who wanted to learn Kabbalah with me. And it's kind of an elderly rabbi, and so we opened up Pardes Rimoni from Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And I'd never learned it before. I bought a copy, and we started going through, and at the end of it, he said, have you learned this before? How do you understand this so well? So I said, well, I've been sitting with Stan for a number of years, and this is like the same material. It's just, I'm just translating it into as opposed into math, just into like maybe psychology or emotional intelligence kind of ideas. And, but it was, the only reason I understood it was because I actually sat with Stan and learned his material to the best of my ability. And so it definitely translates. I mean, it's not, I think one of the things to take away is like, none of, maybe there'll be an incredibly brilliant scholar who'll come along and will be able to grok like what Stan's talking about geometrically and mathematically and in terms of physics and quantum mechanics and all that. But on whatever level you can sit with this material and just kind of soak it up and understand it, it really opens gates in terms of understanding source material in Kabbalah and in Judaism in general. I mentioned it before. My learning of Jewish texts just skyrocketed after I started sitting with Stan, just because this is so fundamental to Judaism, and it's so fundamental to spirituality in general. Mm-hmm. A question I would ask Stan is what's interesting to me now, especially after I did my string quartet, my second string quartet, which I dedicated to Stan, was that it's all a matter of perspective. So if I'm sitting at the bottom looking up, so this could be, you could be going from the first level to the fourth level going up this way, or it could be that it looks so ununderstandable, so incomprehensible to look up at the top, that when you look up at the top, it looks incredibly simple. And as it comes down, it gets more complex. Mm-hmm. And so I would be, a conversation I would just love to have with Stan, what he thinks about that and how you look, because it seems to me that you really could look at it from, as above, so below, meaning you could look at it from below looking up, or from above looking down, and it's the same kind of thing, which is hard to, which is the I think has to do with the cube octahedron. I think that's what he was getting at.
Inversion, invagination and inversion was an idea that always fascinated him, both in terms of just cellular biology, the growth of, from a fertilized egg to a fetus, and how that happens just in terms of cell biology and cell division, and it's both DNA and environment, and where there's a particular point where instead of all of the divided cells having the same environment, at a certain point you've got an outer shell and cells inside, and right there you've got two different kinds of cells. You've got a differentiation because the environment in which they are developing is different. There's an inside and there's an outside.
Wow.
So that kind of idea was, he grabbed it and used it, saw where it was occurring, explored using that as a possibility. So yeah, he would have really liked your question.
So based on what the two of you have just talked about, and kept making me thinking, and I kept looking at Michael's library behind him and all those books up there, and that are missing an element in Jewish scholarship over the years, and there's I'm going to call it arrogance in terms of not paying attention and not seeing that the possibility exists, that there is another perspective in trying to explain these ideas, and a lens that is missing, that Stan tried to get through to people, and it just they just wouldn't listen. They said, how does this guy, how can we accept mathematical perspectives of this when there's no reference to that? But there is. You had to look for it, and he tried to show that it was there if people would have just looked and listened and let down their ego, in terms of knowing all there is to know about Kabbalah and Torah and all these sorts of things. So this is what we're doing, folks. There's 5 of us. We're like,
Voice crying in the wilderness.
Yeah, Stan called me a Jewish renegade, and I think that's what we all are, in doing this. We're renegades trying to get through and say, look, you can't just sit back now and say, we've learned everything there is to know. We're opening up something that is explosive in terms of reconnecting and revitalizing Judaism, and especially putting relevance, for young people. So we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep plugging away. Maybe somebody will listen, and say, look, this is worth doing. And again, our main goal now in terms of a foundation, our project, is to get this all digitized so that we then can cross-reference a lot of the stuff that Daniel's talking about and say, okay, this leads us to this. And, we're, our friend Tad is talking about putting it into an AI perspective formation so that we can have access to it. So again, we're going to just keep plugging away. We're going to go through some more of these Torus journals, and I think I've got one picked out for next time. So we'll be continuing on. We're just going to keep doing it, and out there, there's a line from a movie: somebody will listen. Somebody will listen. In any case,
build it, they will come.
Yeah. Wish I could remember the film. And in any case, thanks for joining us again. Thank you all for your perspectives. It's great stuff today. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, and take care. Bye-bye.